My own grandson tried to steal my house from under me. The boy I raised when his parents were too busy working. The child I fed, clothed, and loved like my own son. He looked me in the eyes and lied to my face about legal papers. He thought I was just some confused old woman who would sign anything he put in front of me. But I am 75 years old. I have lived through wars, recessions, heartbreak, and loss. I have buried a husband, raised children, and survived things this boy could never imagine. He thought my age made me weak. He thought my love for him made me blind. He was wrong on both counts. I am going to tell you exactly how my 28-year-old grandson Michael tried to con me out of everything I owned. How he planned to take my home, my savings, my life insurance policy. Everything my late husband Harold and I worked 47 years to build. But more importantly, I am going to tell you how I caught him. How I turned his own scheme against him. How this supposedly helpless grandmother outsmarted a grown man who thought he was so clever. You need to hear this story. Because if it happened to me, it could happen to you. Or your mother. Or your grandmother. These financial predators are everywhere now. They target seniors. They use our love against us. Michael came to my house 3 weeks ago with a folder full of official-looking documents. He sat at my kitchen table where I used to help him with homework. He smiled that same sweet smile I remembered from when he was 7 years old. Then he tried to rob me blind. The worst part was not the money. The worst part was realizing that the little boy I had rocked to sleep, the teenager I had driven to baseball practice, the young man I had helped through college, saw me as nothing more than a target. A walking bank account with a heartbeat. But I have news for anyone who thinks they can take advantage of Margaret Chin just because she has gray hair and wrinkled hands. I may be old, but I am not stupid. I may walk slowly, but my mind is sharp as ever. And when someone tries to hurt me, I hurt them back. Not with violence. Not with anger. With something much more powerful. With wisdom. Let me tell you about my life before everything changed. I wake up every morning at 6:30. I make my coffee in the same blue mug Harold bought me for our 20th anniversary. I sit in my kitchen and watch the sun rise through the window over my sink. My house is small but comfortable. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a living room where the carpet is worn thin from decades of family gatherings. The walls are covered with photographs. Harold in his army uniform. Our wedding day. Our children as babies, as teenagers, as adults with families of their own. And scattered throughout all those memories are pictures of Michael. Michael is a chubby toddler covered in chocolate cake. Michael missing his front teeth at age 6. Michael in his high school graduation cap and gown. Michael at college looking so proud and grown up. I loved that boy more than my own life. When his parents divorced, he was only 8 years old. His mother, my daughter Sarah, was working 2 jobs to make ends meet. His father moved across the country and barely called. So Michael spent most afternoons here with me and Harold. I taught him to bake cookies. Harold taught him to fix things around the house. We helped him with homework at this very kitchen table. When he had nightmares, he would crawl into our guest bedroom and sleep between us like a scared little puppy. He was the light of our lives. Even after Sarah remarried and moved Michael to a bigger house across town, he still came to visit every weekend. Even as a teenager, when most boys would rather hang out with friends than grandparents, Michael still chose to spend time with us. He would mow my lawn in summer and shovel my driveway in winter. He never asked for payment. He said taking care of me was just what family does. When Harold died 2 years ago, Michael was one of the pallbearers at the funeral. I will never forget the sight of my grandson carrying my husband to his final rest. The boy had become a man, but I could still see traces of that sweet 8-year-old in his face. After the funeral, Michael promised to look after me. He said Harold would have wanted him to make sure I was safe and comfortable. He started coming by more often. He would bring groceries, fix small problems around the house, just sit and talk with me about his job, his girlfriend, his plans for the future. I thought I was the luckiest grandmother in the world. My routine was simple and peaceful. Monday mornings I would go to the grocery store. Tuesday was laundry day. Wednesday I volunteered at the church food bank. Thursday I played cards with my neighbor Mrs. Rodriguez. Friday I would clean house and prepare for Michael's weekend visit. Saturday and Sunday belonged to my grandson. We would cook together, watch old movies, work in my small garden. Sometimes he would drive me to the cemetery to visit Harold's grave. We would stand there together in comfortable silence, 3 generations connected by love and memory. I trusted Michael completely. When I needed help understanding my Medicare paperwork, I called him. When the bank sent confusing statements, I asked him to explain. When contractors came to give estimates for roof repairs or furnace maintenance, Michael was there to make sure they treated me fairly. He was my protector, my advocate, my beloved grandson. I never imagined he could be my enemy. The first sign something was wrong came 6 months ago. Michael started asking strange questions about my finances. Not helpful questions like before, but probing questions that made me uncomfortable. He wanted to know exactly how much money I had in savings. He asked about my life insurance policies and who the beneficiaries were. He wondered aloud whether I had thought about making a will or setting up a trust. At first, I thought he was just being responsible. Maybe concerned about my future care if I got sick or needed help. These seemed like reasonable topics for a grandson to discuss with his elderly grandmother. But something in his tone bothered me. There was an urgency there that did not match his caring words. When I gave vague answers, he would press for specifics. When I changed the subject, he would bring it back to money and legal documents. Then he started bringing up stories about other elderly people in our neighborhood. He would tell me about old Mrs. Patterson who had fallen and broken her hip. How she ended up in a nursing home and had to sell her house to pay for care. Or Mr. Johnson down the street whose family fought over his estate after he died because he never made proper arrangements. Michael would shake his head sadly and say how terrible it was when families were not prepared for these situations. Each story came with the same message. I needed to get my affairs in order while I still could. I needed to make sure my assets were protected and my wishes were clear. It all sounded so reasonable, so caring, so responsible. But something deep in my gut told me to be careful. The second warning sign was how Michael started treating me differently. He began speaking to me more slowly, as if I might not understand normal conversation. He would repeat things I had heard perfectly well the first time. He started making decisions for me without asking. He changed my grocery list because he thought certain items were too heavy for me to carry. He suggested I should stop driving to church because the roads were too dangerous for someone my age. Little by little, he was painting a picture of me as someone who could not take care of herself anymore. Someone who needed a younger, smarter person to make important decisions for her. The third warning came when he started bringing friends around to meet me. Young men who worked in real estate or financial services. They would sit in my living room and talk about how confusing modern legal and financial systems could be for seniors. They spoke about me as if I was not there. Discussing how elderly people often make poor decisions about money because they get confused or scared. How families need to step in to protect their older relatives from making mistakes. I began to feel like a specimen under a microscope instead of the grandmother of the house. But the biggest red flag was when Michael started pressuring me to add his name to my bank accounts. He said it would make things easier if something happened to me. He could pay my bills and handle emergencies without having to go through complicated legal procedures. He made it sound like a simple precaution, like wearing a seatbelt or locking doors at night. Just common sense preparation for an uncertain future. But I remembered Harold's voice from 47 years of marriage. He always said the same thing when someone tried to rush us into financial decisions. When someone pushes you to sign papers quickly, that is when you should slow down and think carefully. I told Michael I needed time to consider his suggestions. I said I wanted to talk to my own lawyer and accountant before making any major changes to my finances. His reaction surprised me. Instead of understanding and patience, I saw a flash of anger cross his face. Just for a moment, but it was there. Then he forced a smile and said of course I should take my time. But he kept bringing up the subject every time he visited. That was when I started to realize my beloved grandson might not have my best interests at heart after all. 3 weeks ago, Michael arrived at my house with a leather portfolio and a smile that did not reach his eyes. He hugged me at the door like always, but something felt different. There was a tension in his body, an excitement that seemed barely contained. He sat down at my kitchen table and opened his portfolio with ceremony, like a magician preparing to perform his greatest trick. Inside were several official-looking documents with legal letterheads and complex language that swirled together in intimidating paragraphs. Michael cleared his throat and began his performance. He told me he had been consulting with lawyers and financial advisors about how to protect my assets and secure my future. He said they had developed a comprehensive plan that would ensure my comfort and safety while also protecting my estate from taxes and legal complications. The first document, he explained, was something called a power of attorney. It would allow him to handle my financial affairs if I ever became unable to do so myself. He said it was just a safety measure, like having a spare key to your house. The second document was a trust agreement that would transfer ownership of my house and savings into a legal entity managed by trustees. Michael would be the primary trustee, which meant he would make all decisions about my property and finances. But I would still live in the house and have access to my money, he assured me. Nothing would really change for me day to day. It was just a way to organize things legally to avoid probate court and estate taxes when I died. The third document was a new will that would replace the simple one Harold and I had made years earlier. This new will was much more complex, with trusts and contingencies and legal language I could barely understand. Michael spread all these papers across my kitchen table like he was dealing cards. He had put little yellow sticky notes everywhere I needed to sign, with arrows pointing to signature lines and dates. He pulled out an expensive-looking pen and set it down next to the documents. Then he sat back in his chair and smiled at me expectantly. The whole presentation was smooth and professional. He had clearly practiced every word, every gesture. He spoke with authority about legal concepts and tax strategies. He used phrases like fiduciary responsibility and asset protection that sounded impressive and important. But I am not stupid, despite what he apparently thought. I picked up the power of attorney document and read it carefully. The legal language was dense and confusing, but the basic meaning was clear enough. If I signed this paper, Michael would have complete control over my bank accounts, my investments, my house, everything I owned. I could not write a check, make a withdrawal, or even access my own safe deposit box without his permission. He could sell my house, move my money, make any financial decision he wanted. And I would have no legal way to stop him. The trust document was even worse. It did not just give Michael control over my assets. It actually transferred ownership of everything to him. I would become essentially a tenant in my own home, dependent on his generosity for every penny I needed to live. And the new will left everything to Michael directly, cutting out his mother Sarah and my other grandchildren entirely. This was not estate planning. This was theft dressed up in legal language. Michael watched my face as I read, and I could see him growing nervous as I took longer than he expected. He started talking faster, explaining how complicated these documents were and how I should not worry about understanding every detail. He said his lawyer had assured him this was all standard paperwork for someone in my situation. He mentioned how expensive it had been to have these documents prepared professionally, and how we should not waste that investment by delaying. Then he made his biggest mistake. He tried to create urgency by telling me there were tax deadlines and legal requirements that meant I needed to sign these papers today. Right now. Before it was too late to take advantage of these protections. I set the papers down and looked at my grandson. Really looked at him. This young man I had loved and trusted and treated like my own son was sitting in my kitchen trying to trick me into signing away everything I owned. He had spent weeks, maybe months, planning this elaborate con. He had consulted with lawyers and prepared official documents. He had researched exactly what legal language would sound convincing to an elderly woman who might not understand the implications. He had calculated that my love for him would make me vulnerable to manipulation. That my age would make me easy to confuse and intimidate. That my trust in family would prevent me from seeing his betrayal until it was too late. He thought he was so smart. So clever. So much smarter than his foolish old grandmother. But Michael had made one critical error in his planning. He had underestimated me completely. I sat there staring at those papers and felt my world tilting sideways. The grandson I had raised, the boy who used to fall asleep in my lap while I read him bedtime stories, was trying to steal my life from me. Part of me wanted to believe I was wrong. That maybe I was misunderstanding something. That Michael really was trying to help me and I was just too old and confused to see his good intentions. Maybe this was what happened when you got to be 75. Maybe your mind started playing tricks on you and you began seeing threats where none existed. Maybe I was becoming one of those paranoid elderly people who suspects everyone of trying to take advantage of them. I looked at Michael's face across my kitchen table. He still had some of the features of that sweet little boy I remembered. The same brown eyes, the same dimple in his left cheek when he smiled. Surely this person who shared my blood and my memories could not be capable of such calculated cruelty. But then I read those documents again. And the legal language was clear no matter how much I wanted it to mean something different. If I signed these papers, I would be giving Michael complete control over my life. He could force me into a nursing home and sell my house. He could spend my savings on anything he wanted. He could leave me with nothing while he lived off the money Harold and I had saved for 47 years. I felt sick to my stomach. Not just from the betrayal, but from the realization of how carefully he had planned this. How many conversations we had shared where he was studying me, looking for weaknesses he could exploit. How many times he had pretended to care about my well-being while really calculating how to steal from me. The boy I had trusted with everything had been plotting against me for months. I thought about Harold and what he would say if he were still alive. He never liked it when people tried to pressure us into quick decisions. He always said that anyone who would not let you take time to think was usually trying to cheat you. Harold would have seen right through Michael's act. He would have thrown him out of the house and told him never to come back. But Harold was gone, and I was alone with this terrible knowledge of who my grandson really was. I felt so stupid. So naive. So foolish for trusting someone just because we shared family ties. I had always believed that blood meant something. That family members looked out for each other no matter what. Now I realized that some people see family relationships as nothing more than opportunities for exploitation. The worst part was the guilt. I kept wondering if somehow this was my fault. Had I spoiled Michael too much when he was young? Had I given him the impression that my money would always be available to solve his problems? Maybe I had failed as a grandmother by not teaching him better values. Maybe his parents' divorce had damaged him in ways I never understood. Maybe there were signs of this selfishness and greed that I should have noticed years earlier. I found myself making excuses for him even as he sat there waiting for me to sign documents that would destroy my independence. Maybe he was in financial trouble and desperate. Maybe he really believed he was helping me by taking control of my affairs. Maybe. But then I stopped making excuses and started getting angry instead. I thought about all the sacrifices I had made for this young man. All the birthday presents and Christmas gifts I had bought when money was tight. All the times I had chosen to spend my limited income on things for Michael instead of things for myself. I remembered working extra shifts at the department store where I was employed for 32 years, saving money for Michael's college fund. Harold and I had gone without vacations and new clothes so we could help pay for his education. When Michael graduated, he hugged us both and promised he would never forget what we had done for him. He said he would spend the rest of his life trying to repay our generosity and love. Now I knew what he meant by repayment. I realized that my guilt was misplaced. I had been a good grandmother. I had loved Michael unconditionally and supported him in every way I could. His decision to betray that love was not my fault. It was a reflection of who he had chosen to become. And I was not going to let him get away with it. Sitting at that kitchen table with those fraudulent documents spread out before me, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to fight back. I looked up at Michael and gave him my sweetest grandmother smile. The same smile I had used when he was a little boy asking for extra cookies before dinner. I told him how wonderful it was that he had gone to so much trouble to help me with these complicated legal matters. How grateful I was to have such a caring grandson who would take time from his busy life to protect his elderly grandmother. Michael relaxed visibly. He thought my smile meant he had won. Then I told him I was so impressed by his thoroughness that I wanted to have my own lawyer review these documents before signing them, just to make sure I understood everything completely. His smile faltered just slightly. He said that really was not necessary since his lawyer had already prepared everything properly. Besides, these documents needed to be filed today to meet certain deadlines. I kept my voice sweet and innocent. I said I understood his urgency, but Harold had always taught me never to sign legal papers without having my own attorney look them over first. It was just a silly old habit I could not break. Michael tried a different approach. He said his lawyer charged by the hour, and having another attorney review the documents would be an expensive waste of money. Money that could be better spent on my care and comfort. I nodded as if I was considering his point. Then I said I would be happy to pay for my own lawyer's time since this was such an important matter. After all, what was a few $100s compared to protecting my entire estate? Now Michael was getting frustrated. He started explaining again how these were standard documents and there was really nothing to review. He said I was making this much more complicated than it needed to be. But I had made my decision. I told him I would not sign anything today, but I would call my attorney first thing Monday morning and schedule an appointment. We could finalize everything later in the week after I had proper legal advice. Michael's mask slipped completely then. The caring grandson disappeared and was replaced by someone I barely recognized. His voice got sharp and impatient. He said I was being stubborn and unreasonable. He told me I should trust him since he was family and only wanted what was best for me. He said outside lawyers would just confuse me with technical language and charge me fees for unnecessary services. The more agitated he became, the calmer I felt. His reaction confirmed every suspicion I had about his true motives. I stood up from the table and started clearing away the documents. I said I was tired and needed to rest, but we could continue this conversation after I had spoken with my lawyer. Michael grabbed my wrist as I reached for the papers. Not hard enough to hurt, but firmly enough to stop me. He said we needed to finish this today because there might not be another opportunity. I looked down at his hand on my wrist, then back up at his face. I told him very quietly to let go of me. Something in my tone made him release his grip immediately. I gathered up all the documents and walked to my front door. I opened it wide and told Michael I thought he should leave now. He tried one more approach. He switched back to the concerned grandson act and said he was worried about me, that I seemed confused and was not thinking clearly about these important matters. Maybe I should talk to a doctor about memory problems or cognitive decline that might be affecting my judgment. That was his second biggest mistake. Suggesting that I was mentally incompetent was exactly the wrong thing to say to someone who had just outmaneuvered his entire scheme. I told Michael that my mind was perfectly clear. Clear enough to recognize a con game when I saw one. Clear enough to know when someone was trying to steal from me. And clear enough to know that he was no longer welcome in my home. His face went white. He realized that his careful plan had failed completely and that I understood exactly what he had been trying to do. He started to say something, but I cut him off. I told him he had exactly 60 seconds to get out of my house before I called the police. Michael looked at me for a long moment as if he was seeing me clearly for the first time. The helpless old woman he thought he could manipulate was gone. In her place stood someone who would not be bullied or tricked or intimidated. He picked up his empty portfolio and walked out my front door. I watched him get in his car and drive away. Then I locked the door behind him and sat down in my living room. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. From anger. And from something else I had not felt in a long time. Pride in myself for being strong enough to fight back. The next morning I called my attorney, David Morrison, who had handled legal matters for Harold and me for over 20 years. I told him about Michael's visit and asked him to review the documents my grandson had left behind. David was quiet for a long moment after I finished my story. Then he said those papers represented one of the most comprehensive attempts at financial elder abuse he had ever seen. If I had signed them, Michael would have gained complete legal control over my life within 24 hours. He confirmed what I already suspected. The power of attorney was so broad it would have allowed Michael to do anything with my money and property. The trust agreement would have transferred actual ownership of all my assets to him. And the new will would have cut out all my other heirs entirely. David said Michael had clearly consulted with someone knowledgeable about elder law to design this scheme. These were not amateur documents thrown together at the last minute. They were professionally crafted legal instruments designed specifically to transfer wealth from an elderly person to a younger family member. I asked David what I should do next. He said I had several options, including filing criminal charges for attempted fraud and elder abuse. But he also warned me that prosecuting a family member would be emotionally difficult and might tear apart relationships with other relatives. I thought about that for several days. Did I really want to see my grandson arrested and possibly sent to prison? Did I want to put my daughter Sarah through the pain of seeing her son prosecuted for trying to rob his grandmother? But then I realized this was not just about my family. Michael had clearly done research and planning for this con game. What if he tried the same scheme on other elderly relatives or neighbors? What if he was already targeting other seniors who might not be as suspicious or fortunate as I had been? I decided to report the attempted fraud to both the police and the state attorney general's office that handles elder abuse cases. I wanted Michael's name in the system so that if he tried this again with someone else, there would be a record of his previous attempt. The detective who took my statement said these kinds of family financial scams were becoming more common as the population aged. Adult children and grandchildren were increasingly viewing elderly relatives as sources of easy money rather than people deserving respect and care. She commended me for recognizing the scam and refusing to sign the documents. She said many seniors in similar situations are successfully victimized because they trust family members completely and cannot believe their own relatives would steal from them. The hardest part came when I had to tell the rest of my family what Michael had tried to do. I called my daughter Sarah first and explained what had happened. She was devastated. She cried on the phone and kept apologizing for her son's behavior. Sarah said she had noticed Michael asking questions about my finances recently, but she assumed he was just concerned about my welfare as I got older. She never imagined he was planning to rob me. My other grandchildren were shocked and angry when they learned what Michael had attempted. They rallied around me with support and love that helped heal some of the emotional damage his betrayal had caused. But Michael himself disappeared from all our lives. He changed his phone number and moved to a different city. None of us have heard from him since that day I threw him out of my house. I learned later that he had been having serious financial problems. He owed money on credit cards, student loans, and a car payment he could not afford. He had recently lost his job and was facing possible eviction from his apartment. Apparently, he decided that stealing his grandmother's life savings was an easier solution than getting his own life in order. I felt sorry for him in some ways. Not sorry enough to forgive him, but sorry that he had chosen to destroy his family relationships rather than simply ask for help. If Michael had come to me honestly and explained his financial troubles, I would have found ways to assist him. Instead, he chose to see me as a victim rather than a person who loved him. That choice cost him everything. Not just my money, which he never got, but my love, my trust, and his place in our family. I changed my locks, updated my will with proper safeguards, and put additional security measures on all my financial accounts. I also started volunteering with a local organization that educates seniors about financial fraud and elder abuse. I wanted to make sure other elderly people would be better prepared than I was if their own family members tried to betray them. The next morning I called my attorney, David Morrison, who had handled legal matters for Harold and me for over 20 years. I told him about Michael's visit and asked him to review the documents my grandson had left behind. David was quiet for a long moment after I finished my story. Then he said those papers represented one of the most comprehensive attempts at financial elder abuse he had ever seen. If I had signed them, Michael would have gained complete legal control over my life within 24 hours. He confirmed what I already suspected. The power of attorney was so broad it would have allowed Michael to do anything with my money and property. The trust agreement would have transferred actual ownership of all my assets to him. And the new will would have cut out all my other heirs entirely. David said Michael had clearly consulted with someone knowledgeable about elder law to design this scheme. These were not amateur documents thrown together at the last minute. They were professionally crafted legal instruments designed specifically to transfer wealth from an elderly person to a younger family member. I asked David what I should do next. He said I had several options, including filing criminal charges for attempted fraud and elder abuse. But he also warned me that prosecuting a family member would be emotionally difficult and might tear apart relationships with other relatives. I thought about that for several days. Did I really want to see my grandson arrested and possibly sent to prison? Did I want to put my daughter Sarah through the pain of seeing her son prosecuted for trying to rob his grandmother? But then I realized this was not just about my family. Michael had clearly done research and planning for this con game. What if he tried the same scheme on other elderly relatives or neighbors? What if he was already targeting other seniors who might not be as suspicious or fortunate as I had been? I decided to report the attempted fraud to both the police and the state attorney general's office that handles elder abuse cases. I wanted Michael's name in the system so that if he tried this again with someone else, there would be a record of his previous attempt. The detective who took my statement said these kinds of family financial scams were becoming more common as the population aged. Adult children and grandchildren were increasingly viewing elderly relatives as sources of easy money rather than people deserving respect and care. She commended me for recognizing the scam and refusing to sign the documents. She said many seniors in similar situations are successfully victimized because they trust family members completely and cannot believe their own relatives would steal from them. The hardest part came when I had to tell the rest of my family what Michael had tried to do. I called my daughter Sarah first and explained what had happened. She was devastated. She cried on the phone and kept apologizing for her son's behavior. Sarah said she had noticed Michael asking questions about my finances recently, but she assumed he was just concerned about my welfare as I got older. She never imagined he was planning to rob me. My other grandchildren were shocked and angry when they learned what Michael had attempted. They rallied around me with support and love that helped heal some of the emotional damage his betrayal had caused. But Michael himself disappeared from all our lives. He changed his phone number and moved to a different city. None of us have heard from him since that day I threw him out of my house. I learned later that he had been having serious financial problems. He owed money on credit cards, student loans, and a car payment he could not afford. He had recently lost his job and was facing possible eviction from his apartment. Apparently, he decided that stealing his grandmother's life savings was an easier solution than getting his own life in order. I felt sorry for him in some ways. Not sorry enough to forgive him, but sorry that he had chosen to destroy his family relationships rather than simply ask for help. If Michael had come to me honestly and explained his financial troubles, I would have found ways to assist him. Instead, he chose to see me as a victim rather than a person who loved him. That choice cost him everything. Not just my money, which he never got, but my love, my trust, and his place in our family. I changed my locks, updated my will with proper safeguards, and put additional security measures on all my financial accounts. I also started volunteering with a local organization that educates seniors about financial fraud and elder abuse. I wanted to make sure other elderly people would be better prepared than I was if their own family members tried to betray them.